Well, it's a pretty nice house.
It's stunning, isn't it?
Very open plan. The housing downturn is deepening across the country. Prices have fallen throughout much of 2022 and are set to continue to fall throughout 2023. But that doesn't mean owning a home has become more affordable. The fastest pace of interest rate increases in 3 decades has reduced borrowing capacity by almost a third, pushing the Australian dream further out of reach. But it's not all doom and gloom. Analysts say it's possible there will be a rebound in the second half of the year. Here's Rihanna Whitson.
At Narrabeen on Sydney's northern beaches, the real estate boom is over.
You've only really got people that have got big life changes who are selling right now, so the people that have to sell.
Property values here have dropped 26.8% in 12 months.
That can convert to 300,000, 500,000, maybe 600 in some cases. But obviously with the rise in interest rates and limited borrowing capacity, it certainly put a dampener on the market.
As house prices continue to drop, selling can be a hard slog.
Don't worry about what's happening in the marketplace, it's what's happening here and now.
The auctioneer's calls for opening bids fell flat.
You're looking for an opening bid of 1.5 million.
And kept falling.
At 1 million, I'll go to 900, but then I won't go any further.
The Canberra property didn't sell.
In all honesty, a lot of them have passed in, but I have sold them within 2 or 3 week period. It's just taking that little bit longer to get that price.
It's a similar story on the other side of the country.
800, you know, I love an opportunist, but we're so far away from that, sir, you wouldn't be even a starter.
The owners of this 5-bedroom house in Perth didn't get the price they wanted.
Thanks kindly for turning out. Have a ripper weekend.
Across the country, house prices have fallen 3.2% in a year. The median property value is just over $714,000. The 2 largest markets, Sydney and Melbourne, have seen the steepest declines, followed by Hobart and Canberra. Despite prices falling for months in Brisbane and the regions, values are still up over 12 months. So too are properties in Perth, while Darwin and Adelaide have posted solid gains.
The rate of decline has been shrinking month to month. I don't think this is so much a recovery in housing market conditions. I think it's the initial shock of rapid rate rises wearing off.
CoreLogic's head of research says home values across the country are on average still up 17% since the start of the pandemic.
Now, there's a lot of variation in that. If you look at a city like Adelaide, values are 43% higher than they were at the onset of COVID. But in a city like Melbourne, values are sitting just 2.8% higher.
And that's it. How are you? Good, yourself? See you, mate. This is it.
As values decline, more vendors are worried about forking out for an expensive marketing campaign.
This was all the 70s or 80s style kitchen.
Instead, couples like this are selling off-market, which means their agent will only show the property to serious buyers.
If it doesn't sell, you can get feedback on your price range, on anything you need to do to the house to make improvements, to make it more attractive to buyers.
Will property prices recover in 2023? The answer to that largely depends on the Reserve Bank. Every interest rate hike reduces the amount people can borrow and pay for a property. It also increases the repayments of existing borrowers. Property analyst Louis Christopher thinks a cash rate above 4% would be dangerous territory for heavily indebted mortgage borrowers.
We would definitely see a lot more property owners having to sell their home in the marketplace, and that would definitely force down prices.
Mr Christopher thinks properties in most capital cities will avoid falls in 2023, with gains as high as 9% in Sydney. He thinks migration will also push up prices for apartments.
The unit market, we believe, will be driven by rising rents. Of course, the increase in underlying demand, which is predominantly going to be driven by a surge in permanent long-term arrivals.
That's left Camilla Rillstone worried. A two-bedroom unit where she lives still costs about $1 million.
We have been saving to buy property for about 2 years now, and unfortunately I think the market is moving quicker than we can save.
Reduced borrowing power means her dream of buying near the beach is further out of reach.
Both myself and my partner work full-time, and yeah, we definitely didn't think it would be as difficult as it is to get a foot on the property ladder, especially in our early 30s, but there you go, here we are.
That means it'll be back to the future for Camilla and her partner. They're moving in with his dad to save up for a bigger house deposit.
The lighting's cool too. Oh, so that's the garage. Okay. Oh yeah. It's quite big, 2 cars. The Australian real estate market is still worth just over $9 trillion. While sales are down, 2022 saw more than 500,000 homes change hands up and down the country. Should we have a look out in this balcony situation?
Yeah, the balcony looks good.
Here to give us a view of where prices are going into 2023 is Nerida Conisbee, the Chief Economist at Ray White. Nerida, what's your overview of how property prices have gone throughout 2022?
It's certainly been a very different market. If we have a look at 2021, prices shot up dramatically. In Sydney, we saw an increase of well over 30%. This year, it's pulled back and Sydney's down 10%, but elsewhere, we are seeing far more variable conditions.
And we are expecting that downturn to continue into 2023. Just by how much do you think?
It is an interesting market at the moment. So overall across Australia, prices have fallen by about 4.5%. Next year, we do expect prices to continue to fall, but the rate of decline is starting to slow. The main reason being is that people are expecting interest rates to cap out at some point, and that point is likely to be sooner rather than later. But you also have to remember we do have population growth starting up again. We've got a construction crisis that's restricting the amount of new homes being built. So all of these things are balancing out at the moment. So a little bit more of a decline, but really we are expecting more increases next year.
And you mentioned population growth, that increase in migration we hadn't seen much during the pandemic. That's really going to support prices, do you think?
We're already seeing the population growth support rental growth, and at the moment there is a severe rental shortage. Rents are pushing up very, very quickly. Housing markets are complicated. A lot of people tend to look at them primarily through interest rates, but there are a lot of other things that drive them. And at the moment, interest rates are the overriding factor, but we know that population growth, housing supply, planning controls, taxes, all of those things can make a difference.
There are some forecasts out there that see interest rates in Australia pushing beyond 4%. What would that do to the property market, given how indebted Australians are?
There are relatively low levels of mortgage stress in Australia at the moment, particularly when we compare to the number of people that are under rental stress. But as you said, rising interest rates do create a lot of problems. For now, we do know that people do have high savings rates. They're probably spending down a lot of those savings at this point. We also know that banks are being very accommodating, so we aren't in a similar situation to where we were during the global financial crisis, when banks were really strapped and unable to support people. So overall, we don't expect high levels of distress selling, but people are becoming far more stressed as a result of mortgage increases.
So with that in mind, I suppose a lot of people who were able to buy property during the height of the pandemic with very low interest rates may not be able to buy that same type of property now.
Very low interest rates did help a lot of people get into the market, but we also know that government incentives also helped. Things like Home Builder were giving people a lot more money to get into the market.
And are you seeing a divergence between investors and home owner-occupiers in terms of those entering the market?
At the moment, we are seeing a pullback in investor activity. So that, again, has to do with rising interest rates. It also has to do that people do tend to invest more in property when the market's moving up as opposed to moving down. Owner-occupier lending does remain relatively high, but of course it has pulled back from where we were. The other group that has really pulled back are first home buyers. So first home buyers have really left the market at this point. They will come back, and I hope they do come back, but at this point they are seeing very low levels of activity.
Nerida Conisbee, great to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
A prestigious and outstanding offering that we have for your competition here today, buyers.
The biggest housing declines have so far been seen at the top end of the market, where prices have fallen 10.5% since April 2022. But some properties in popular suburbs are defying the trend. This home in Sydney sold for $5 million.
It's sold. Congratulations to our third staff.
Is that typical of what you've been seeing in the market throughout the year?
Very much a mixed bag on the auction floor. You've got some good auctions for A-grade stock where the marketing campaign's been run well and the pricing's been gotten right. You're getting good auction results. And then for other stock where perhaps the expectations are a little bit too high, they're often getting punished in the market.
And how are you seeing the current year differ to the previous one?
We're probably down about 25 to 30% on volume. So listing volumes are down, auction volumes are down. And then obviously a little bit more tricky on the auction floor itself.
So your job's slightly harder.
Definitely harder at the moment.
Yeah, trying to get that interest going. And what about when it comes to encouraging the buyers? How are you doing that?
I think the buyer of today is a tentative buyer. They're an uncertain buyer. They're not really sure if they should buy today or if they should wait for the bottom of the market and buy then. So a lot of it is about being able to nurse that buyer to the mark and give them confidence to take action at the moment. But there's good buying to be had if you choose a good property, so it's a good time to be buying.
And you probably don't want to give too much away, but are there any tips for those who are at auction trying to get the best price?
As a seller or as a buyer?
As a buyer.
As a buyer. Okay, well, the first thing that you have to do when you come to an auction is bid. And I think that one of the mistakes that buyers make when they're trying to buy well is that they stand there and they don't bid. You've got to bid. If you want to buy, you have to bid. But I think just be clear on what you feel the property's worth and what your limits are. That's always the best way to buy well at an auction.
Yeah, and knowing your price limits is obviously very important. When it comes to those vendors who are selling, do you have any tips for auction day?
I think it's a time for pragmatism on price for auction day for vendors. Vendors need to understand that if the property's been priced correctly and you've got bidders there, you're going to find out market value on the property. That doesn't mean you have to accept what it is on auction day, but it just means you need to be open-minded about it. So it's a time for open minds.
Clarence White, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And here's the master bedroom.
Yeah, nice and big.
Yes.
So Deb, it's been a pretty successful auction here today. Are vendors still able to achieve the prices they want?
Yeah, the realistic vendors are actually achieving or exceeding their prices in today's market.
When it comes to buyers accessing finance, have you seen them be able to access the finance that they typically once would have?
The challenge at the moment is buyers are actually not able to pay what they once were able to pay, so their approval has come back a bit, and that's just due to the increase in interest rates. So necessarily they don't want to give you a price because they think that's what the property is worth, it's what they have.
And so do you think we will continue then to see prices come down if buyers can't pay the higher price now?
If that seems to be the trend, then yeah, a few little adjustments might have to happen.
Well, I'm going to get some tips from you. Firstly, for those trying to sell, what would you advise?
Well, listen to your agent. I think it's really important that the agents across the market understanding what's available, what just sold, not what sold 3 months ago, because that could be different. Presentation is super important, and if your price guide is incorrect in the first 2 weeks, the buyers won't be there.
And when it comes to those vendors, are you seeing any holdout because they want that higher price that they could have achieved a year or two ago?
You're seeing those 10% of vendors that want those prices, majority not. But I guess at this stage of the year, that's because they've seen what happened between January and now.
And tips for buyers, what do they need to do? Be persistent, I guess.
Be persistent, keep in touch with the agent. Like today's auction, all the registered parties were on our books. They all had relationships with us. We showed them properties, so we understood what they were after, what their budgets were, and etc. So we can direct them to the right property.
Dib Chidiac, thank you so much for having us here today.
Thanks for having me, appreciate it.
If you can't refinance or renegotiate your home loan, you might find yourself trapped with your mortgage. Falling house prices are forcing many homeowners with low deposits into negative equity. Here's Nasim Kadem.
Madeline and Jacqueline Darkovska are fighting to hold on to their home.
It's been really hard. Haven't been able to afford a lot of things, like a basic living.
The twin sisters are among a growing number of Australians who can't refinance their home loan.
We've been struggling a lot. I've recently just lost my job, or my hours have actually been cut. So my mum's actually stepped in to pay or help me pay for my portion of the mortgage.
At the end of 2020, they took on a loan with a smaller lender because they didn't have a 10% deposit. That came with a higher variable rate. Their repayments have risen $300 a month since May, when the RBA began hiking rates.
We'll probably either have to sell the house if we can't keep up with the repayments, so it's really scary for us.
As interest rate hikes drive property prices down, Rate City's research director says more Australians will find themselves trapped.
The main reason that would be is if the equity in your property falls below 20%. Why? Because banks typically will charge refinances, lenders, mortgage insurance, which can run into the tens of thousands of dollars.
Falling house prices aren't the only reason Australians are trapped in a mortgage prison. They now face tougher lending tests imposed by the financial regulator. That means that banks are now assessing their ability to repay the loan at 3% above the rate they locked in, instead of 2.5%. In September 2020, someone with a $100,000 salary was able to get a $750,000 mortgage. 2 years on, that borrower needs to earn $110,000 a year to refinance their loan. And by next September, their annual income will need to have risen to $123,000 if the cash rate reaches 3.35%.
A few years ago, there were people in positions where they could borrow a lot more money from their bank and that has not allowed for any future interest rate rises. So they've not allowed a buffer or any sort of additional breathing space.
Jacqueline Darkovska says they only took out the mortgage because of promises from the RBA that rates wouldn't rise until 2024. The sisters also thought they had access to the home builder grant, which they missed out on.
You sell the Australian dream, but you rip it out from underneath people.
Like the Darkovska twins, many other Australians will be fighting to hold on to their homes.
Many homeowners will come off fixed-rate loan deals within the next 12 months. When they do, they'll be facing what's called a mortgage cliff. If that's you, listen up and act now before your monthly mortgage repayments jump as much as 65%. Emily Stewart has some tips on things you can do.
Felix and Georgia Daniels' baby is due any day now. They bought their home in 2021 and have been keen to get the nursery ready.
Nappies? We weren't sure if the prices were going to keep going up, but we did know that we wanted to have a place before we started to have a family.
Their $600,000 mortgage is manageable for now, but they're worried about what will happen when their fixed rate of 1.89% ends in October. Their repayments will rise by about $1,000 a month.
Pretty nervous. It's going to be really tight.
At least $275 billion worth of fixed rate loans with the Big Four banks come to an end between July and next December. While homeowners with variable mortgages have been facing regular increases as the cash rate goes up, fixed rate borrowers are now facing a steep jump in their repayments, basically overnight.
Well, someone who fixed with the Big Four bank under 2% back in July 2021, they could be looking at a revert rate of an average of 7.18% if the cash rate rises by another full percentage point from this point on, which is expected by a number of economists.
A homeowner who fixed for 2 years in July 2021 on a rate of 1.94% has been paying just over $4,200 a month on $1 million mortgage. When that deal comes to an end, their repayments will jump to nearly $7,000 if the cash rate reaches 3.85%.
There will be a small group of people, particularly those who bought at the peak of house prices during the pandemic, who may have more problems, and they're the ones that the banks really need to monitor.
Personal finance lecturer Di Johnson says around a quarter of all new homeowners have borrowed 6 times their income or more to buy their properties.
I think there's a real hidden financial pain when you look at mortgages, because in Australia people will go without almost anything to be able to pay their rent or their mortgage.
It's definitely 57 for Westpac in the middle of the year.
But there are things fixed-rate borrowers can do now to prepare for the jump in rates.
Start thinking about your next steps at least 2 months in advance. Shop around for a decent rate, but also understand what your bank might be willing to offer you. Renegotiating is one tactic, another is to refinance.
A number of other things that people can do is also starting to make extra payments, building up a buffer, trying to save more.
If you still can't afford your repayments, speak to your lender's financial hardship team. They can defer repayments, waive fees, or help consolidate your debt. Or you could speak to a free and independent financial counsellor.
Yeah. Georgia and Felix hope to negotiate a deal with their bank. The couple plan to tighten their belts.
Nice.
We haven't managed to save anything now for a while. It's just living, paycheck to paycheck.
The increased mortgage repayments might mean Georgia will have to work more hours than she'd hoped.
Maybe I'll have to go back full time, even though in an ideal world I would go back part time.
It's added stress at an already overwhelming time of life.
While it's been tough for those trying to buy or sell properties, it's also been a difficult time for renters. They've seen their payments to landlords go up 10% in a year, and it's also getting harder to secure a home with vacancy rates near decade lows. Just down the road, there's an inspection in a sought-after Sydney suburb where I'm meeting PropTrack's Eleanor Cray. Hey Ellen,
hi, how are you?
Good, should we go in? Searching for the right property can be challenging, with homes renting out at record speeds. And it's likely to get worse before it gets better.
Nice kitchen,
Nice
benchtop big.
Yeah, nice and bright. Oh wow, look at this backyard.
Yes.
Okay, well, Eleanor, can you tell us, why is there just such an extremely tight rental market in Australia at the moment?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex number of factors that are feeding into what are extremely tight rental conditions at the moment. So we know that finding an available rental, let alone one that's in budget with the strong rental price increases that we've seen this year, is very tough for would-be tenants at the moment, and it's placing a lot of pressure on renters. Rental properties are renting out at record speeds very, very quickly. And there's a number of factors that are playing into this historically tight rental market. So we've seen that the supply of available rentals, so the total number of properties available to rent, is sitting around levels that we haven't seen since the 2000s. And that supply of available rentals is around a third lower than pre-pandemic levels. So there really just isn't much out there in terms of choice. At the same time, we're seeing that demand to rent remains incredibly strong. Now, part of that's driven by the fact that we're seeing smaller household sizes. So we've seen that there's more one-person households at the expense of three-person households, according to the census data last year.
And did the pandemic drive that trend for those household sizes?
It's likely that we did see that trend driven by COVID. It became maybe less attractive to live in a share house. People were looking for perhaps more space at home, more solo living, space for a home office and the like. But generally, smaller households, or the reduction in household size, is also part of a long-term trend with respect to our ageing population and things like that.
And in terms of rising interest rates, we know that's causing quite a bit of pain for those with a mortgage. Are they passing it on to tenants if they're investors?
So certainly we are seeing that, mortgage servicing costs have risen. That's placing strain on household budgets. When it comes to investors, it's, I guess, hard to know whether those increased mortgage servicing costs are being passed on to tenants. But we do know that we've seen incredibly strong rental price increases throughout much of this year, and particularly in Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, likely driven in part by investors, capitalising on the very tight rental market conditions that we've got at the moment. That tight supply, increased demand, and it means that there is a bit more leeway to pass those increased mortgage costs on to tenants, perhaps.
And when it comes to tight supply, is it only going to get tighter as we go into 2023 as migration levels increase?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one. So we're not seeing that investor activity at the moment is at strong enough levels to really meaningfully increase the supply of available rentals. At the same time, we know that potentially there's possibly long-term rentals that are moving back to short-term rental platforms like Airbnb and the like. And so that tight rental supply environment that we have at the moment is likely to stick around. And with migration rebounding strongly, international student arrivals and the like, we probably are going to see these tight rental market conditions continuing, particularly in the capital cities, Sydney, Melbourne, and we know Brisbane is very tight at the moment. But, you know, when it comes to international student arrivals, lots of them choose Sydney and Melbourne, and particularly the inner city suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne as their destination, given the proximity to universities and employment opportunities and the like.
What's your outlook broadly for 2023?
So when we look at rental markets, they are historically tight at the moment, and there isn't anything on the horizon that is going to really meaningfully increase rental supply. So we're likely to experience these tough rental market conditions for some time to come, particularly with rebounding migration. Although there are probably some indicators that are pointing to the fact that maybe the pace of rental price increases we've seen at the moment is probably going to slow. Maybe things are going to get a little bit worse before they get better, but I don't think they're going to get worse at the pace at which they have over the last 12 months. We're also likely to see that perhaps share housing becomes a little bit more popular as renters' budgets are really stretched. It's going to become, I guess, a necessity for some people. They're not going to maybe be able to afford that space for that home office and the like, and potentially be pushed back to larger household sizes as renters' budgets are being significantly strained by the strong rental price pressures that we've seen.
Eleanor Cray, so great to talk to you. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
2022 saw Australia devastated by floods on the east coast. Banks are now assessing home loans for their exposure to extreme weather events. It's being described as a looming climate subprime mortgage crisis. Amelia Terzon has more.
Climate change is expected to escalate the number of severe weather events. And like home buyers, the finance industry is trying to understand its exposure to the elements. The insurance industry says at present, no region in Australia is uninsurable. However, some regions may become increasingly difficult to insure as extreme weather risks grow.
Some areas of Australia are becoming more complex to insure, and the price of insurance is rising. This is why we need to see substantial investment in resilience and mitigation.
Economist Claire Ibrahim warns that homeowners need property insurance to take out home loans.
Insurance obviously kind of protects the homeowner, but also kind of protects the bank.
She says that poses a risk for longer home loans.
The worst effects of climate change, those locked-in damages, are going to play out in the next 30 years, particularly in Australia. So it's very reasonable to start thinking about it not as this future risk, but as a current risk.
The Reserve Bank is also looking at this area and how home loans with low deposits get even riskier when climate change is factored in.
Remember the GFC? The idea that there was this subprime? Well, now we're looking at climate subprime. Banks are starting to get wise to that now, so they don't want to get properties on their mortgage books which in future could become uninsurable.
Carl Mallon's firm claims there are many regions where lots of homes could become difficult to insure by 2030.
It's not just towns like Shepparton that are at risk. Right across the country, properties are under threat from bushfires, cyclones, floods. Australia's biggest lender, the Commonwealth Bank, just found that $31 billion worth of its current home loans are exposed to extreme weather events.
CBA got this figure by looking at insurance coverage, default probability and the risk to real estate valuations.
This is where we start to ring the alarm bell about property price corrections for homes in high-risk locations.
Those alarm bells are already ringing in Tabish Ahmed's head.
Definitely no one wants to risk in, if you're big investment on that, you need to give a double thought to it.
Considering the climate risks now to save financial pain later.
Thanks for the inspection, Natalie. And that's all from this summer series special on housing. For more on our business stories, you can head to the ABC News website, or you can catch up on the latest on iView. I'm Alicia Barry. Thanks for watching.